Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another live with me, Richard Vobes, a live stream. And it's the 29th of May, 2020. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I'm carrying on with the reading of I Saw Two Englands by H.V. Morton. And yesterday I sort of petered out to a fuddle. I'm hoping that I don't do the same again. That was embarrassing. However, these things do happen. But there is a nice video out that made up for it. Hopefully you enjoyed that video. He went off to look at this chair the last time I'm just going to move on from that. I don't think I need to repeat all that because I was just struggling with it. I just think we will continue. Anyway, hello to Mark Donny McLeod. Hello to the lovely Julia. Hello to Steve G. Hello to Mike Stevens, to Audrey Forbes Hamilton, to Michael Angel, to Graham Roffey. By the way, Graham, I have got your video that you sent. I haven't looked at it yet. I will be downloading it a little bit later, and the aim is to put it in the show tonight. And Ed Loud, hello to you. So that's all good. I bought a copy of Off the Beaten Track. It's falling to bits. I would send it straight back. Straight back. Say, you don't expect it to fall to bits? Oh dear, I'm so sorry. What can I say? I hope it wasn't expensive. I hope it wasn't an expensive one. You can download it for free. And I do put the link up with the videos. Anyway. So, let us see how we get on. This time, on the old Voby One-Eyed Kenobi Shoby. Oh, it's not the Voby Shoby. It's the Baldy Explorer. Yes. Good afternoon to Linda Kane. Thank you very much. Lovely. Another lovely day. Right. We've started already, haven't I? Upon a long stretch of Ermine Street, about 7 miles to the south of Peterborough, I came to the village of Stilton, from which the King of Cheeses takes its name. William Camden, who was there in the reign of Elizabeth, noted that the original name used to be Stilton, but it had already been contracted to Stilton. So mark how fate was already on the side of the still unborn cheese, smoothing out the name so that Stilton should not go stammering into the world as Stitchelton. Oh, Stitchelton. If Stilton is king of the English cheeses, cheddar is the queen. Well, it's funny because I would have said that cheddar is the king of the cheeses and Stilton is a knave. But anyway, cheddar is the queen and Cheshire is the heir apparent. Other noble members of this family are the Dukes of Double Gloucester and Leicester, Little Wilts and Wensleydale, and I have no hesitation in adding it to the august company, Single Gloucester, which is made from skimmed milk. I know Double Gloucester, but Single Gloucester with skimmed milk sounds very pale. The village of Stilton, situated on a suicidal portion of the Great North Road, has nothing to recommend it but the superb grey stone bell, one of the great post houses of former days. I wonder if Stilton now is bypassed. Must be. I was going to do, and I may still do, a series on the Great North Road, travelling the length of the Great North Road from London to Edinburgh. I did fancy doing that, but I would love to have done it with a coach and horses. Probably won't happen, but that would have been great, wouldn't it? So when he says it was a post, this pub was a post, what did he call it? A post pub, a post house. Yeah, they recommend the post houses. That's right. Yeah, post house. Travellers who pass through Stilton at less than 50 miles an hour may have noticed the fine copper sign, the finest from London to York, which overhangs the whole width of the pavement outside the bell. and is supported by a stout post. I encountered an old man inside the bell who told me that his father well remembered the days when Stilton rang to the sound of hooves, the jangle of harness, the knock of traces, the tootle of coach horns, and the clatter of teams as they were led over the cobbles. Those were exciting days. The old man had often heard his father describe the flocks of northern cattle and sheep that came in a steady flow through Stilton, to pause there long enough for the cattle to be shod before moving on to the south. One Smith at Stilton did practically nothing else but shoe cattle. Aye, he says. They were good days, says the old man, but the railways stopped all that. Now they're talking about making one of these bypass roads around Stilton so that nothing at all will happen there, not even accidents, he added sadly. Is somebody look it up? Go on. Is it bypass? He's talking about it bypassed. The interior of the Bell, that's the pub, the post house, is not worthy of the exterior. During the past 200 years, the noble proportions of the ancient stone building has been ruined by little bars and cubbyholes of varnished wood. And though the place has an agreeable air of being well used and lived in, I should like to see it emerge from the hands of a competent architect. It could be made one of the finest inns on the Great North Road. It's called the Bell at Stilton. Let's have a look. And I'm just curious now. The Bell at Stilton. Is that still there? Has that closed down? The Bell Stilton. Opening times. Oh, it is. Let's have a look. See what it looks like. The Bell Hotel, Eatery and Coffee House. Oh, pretty nice. Let's have a look. I'll show you an image. Here is an image. That looks nice. Hang on. View image. Let's just see if I can get the Skype up. There we go, look. The Bell at Stilton. Stilton Bell. It looks very nice, doesn't it? What a nice looking pub that was. But he didn't rate it terribly much, which is a bit odd. Right, how do I get back to me? There we are. How do I get back to me? It's all about me. So the interior is not worthy of the exterior. Well, the exterior looks very nice. It was in the Bell at Stilton that a rich, creamy, maggoty cheese from Leicestershire, not 1 ounce of which was ever made at Stilton, attracted the attention of stagecoach passengers in the 18th century. This superb cheese was occasionally offered to passengers at the Bell while they snatched a hasty meal during the change of horses, and it was natural that discerning visitors should have persuaded the innkeeper to sell a cheese now and then, with the result that the fame of the cheese bought at Stilton was soon carried into all parts of England. But, as I say, although people call it Stilton because they ate it and bought it at Stilton, it was not made there. It's interesting, he calls it a creamy, maggoty cheese. Anybody fancy a nice slice? Hello there, welcome to the Bell. Would you like a nice slice of creamy, maggoty cheese? Oh, you can pick the maggots out yourself if you like, or we've got this special little cocktail stick, or as we like to call it, maggot extractor apparatus. There we are, so have a little go. It's £5.50 an ounce. Oh, that's as much as I pay for an ounce of shag. Yes, I'm sure it is, sir, but that's in a different department. Its history is a long and honourable one. It was first made, so it's believed, by Lady Beaumont, the wife of Sir Henry Beaumont, who represented Leicester in Parliament from 1679 to 1687. In the following century, the recipe became known to the neighbouring Ashbys of Quenby Hall, when their housekeeper, Elizabeth Scarborough, made it. This Elizabeth married a man called Morton and went to live at Little Dalby in Leicestershire, about 4 miles from Melton Mowbray, taking her precious secret with her. The cheese was at this time known as Quenby cheese, presumably because Elizabeth Orton had learned how to make it when employed at Quenby Hall. Her cheeses became famous in the villages around and about, and she evidently guarded her recipe well, for it was whispered that Quenby cheese could be made only of milk from cows fed on one small meadow called Orton's Close, which of course was nonsense, but it helped to discourage imitations. So carefully was the secret kept that many years after, only 3 other dairy women were making the cheese, and it's believed that 2 of them were the daughters of Mrs. Orton. One of her daughters married a man called Cooper Thornhill, landlord of the Bell at Stilton, and possibly the first cheeses were sent to Stilton as presents from Mrs. Orton to her daughter. Excuse me one moment. Bit of COVID. You can now get COVID cheese, apparently. COVID cheese. It's COVID in nice disease. COVID cheese, nice disease. COVID cheese is nice. Anyway, yes. So, if so, these gifts were made early in the 18th century because Defoe mentions the cheese in the first edition of his Tour, a book that was published in 1724 to 1726, and he says, "We pass Stilton, a town famous for cheese, which is called our English parmesan, and is brought to the table with the mites or maggots round it, so thick that they bring a spoon with you to eat the mites with, as you do with the cheese." Good God, are you seriously telling me that the maggots and mites are on the cheese and you eat the cheese, Mr. Defoe? Oh, yes, that's exactly what I'm telling you. I was there, I know. I don't make any of this up, you know. I'm sure you don't. This suggests to my mind that Defoe had not eaten Stilton himself and perhaps mistook the cheese scoop for a spoon. Ah, there you see. That makes a lot of sense. However, the demand by stagecoach passengers at Stilton for this unique cheese was so great by the beginning of the 19th century that all the villages around Little Dalby were hard at work making it. The secret of its manufacture and the superstition about Orton's Close having long since expired. As I walked up the village street, I noticed that many a little shop advertised its prime Stilton cheeses. I entered a shop kept by Miss Spriggs, who turned out to be the originator of Motorborne Stilton. Miss Spriggs. When the stagecoaches stopped, said Miss Spriggs, the sale of Stilton stopped in the village. When I was a girl, you couldn't buy Stilton in Stilton for love nor money. I was born at the Bell, so I've always been interested in Stilton. About 12 years ago, when the motor cars were coming through Stilton and the place got busy again, I wondered whether people would still buy Stilton at Stilton like they used to in the old days. I tried it out, and it was a great success. Never a day passes now but someone stops at my shop and buys a cheese. Has anyone ever tried to make Stilton at Stilton? I asked her. Oh, never, as far as I know, she replied. I've always understood that there's a weed in the grass here that makes it impossible. As I dare say you know, all good Stilton comes from round Melton way in Leicester, as it has always done. It's a difficult cheese to make. I've heard it said that a lot depends on the sense of touch. Some cheesemakers believe that this sense of touch is handed down in the families. You see, at one point in the making of Stilton, you have to test the curd with the tips of your fingers to see if it's ready for the next stage. And if your sense of touch isn't right, well, you may have spoilt the cheese. Miss Spriggs is rightly proud of her success in having brought Stilton back to the Great North Road. But you'll be surprised by the jokes they make, she said, referring to her customers. They jump out of their cars and come in here and ask for a tame one, or do I sell dog collars for them? Why, You'd never believe the fun some people seem to get out of buying Stilton. Well, it takes all sorts to make a world. Excuse me. I've had too much of that COVID cheese. COVID with disease. It's probably a lot of the dry grass that's been in my throat today. Anyway, that bears out my own experience, I told her. Now, what do you do as an expert? So hang on. Now, what do you as an expert think of that small one in the corner, the second from the left? Well, said Miss Briggs confidently, dropping her voice into a whisper, if you don't intend to eat it for a bit, you could put it by, say, for a couple of months, and then you'll have a really good Stilton. It happened to me at Peterborough. I was sitting in a restaurant that overlooks the marketplace. The old town hall, lifted on its 16th century columns, stood immediately below me, and I sat there watching people queue up outside, 6 feet apart. As each one held in his hand a small cardboard box. Inside the box was the state's gift to its children, a gas mask. Somewhere inside the building, the citizens were having their masks tested so that they might face the future with confidence. They would not get COVID if it killed them. They were an ordinary-looking crowd. Some of them were smiling, others were just dull or impassive, and no one would have guessed that they were candidates for survival in a mad world. They looked like people waiting for a bus, not a cataclysm. The morning paper had described an attack on the Polish custom house at Danzig. Shots had been fired, perhaps the first shots of a war that was surely to last. The first shots of a war that was surely at last inevitable. The queue moved slowly towards the gas chambers, men, women and children. What a picture. Civilization in June 1939. Try it in June 2020. I knew that my holiday was over. I might have gone on for a day or two. Thank you. I might have gone over for a day or two. Indeed, I had intended to go to Lincoln, but the desire to travel had departed, and I was well aware that now the only thing to do was to go home and stay alert. However, had I have done what I set out to do, I would have enjoyed the last glimpse of pre-war... I had done what I had set out to do. I had enjoyed the last glimpse of pre-war England. I had wandered at will around the country, admiring it and remembering its past, and now I felt as one is aware of an approaching thunderstorm in the summer, the impending darkness of war. How or when it would come, I had no idea, but come it would. Of that I was certain. And I was certain, too, that when it came, it would bring, for the first time since the Saxon age, widespread death and destruction to the land that is no longer an island. I went south to London that day, and as I looked at the green meadows, the little villages and the quiet towns of England, I discovered in my heart anger, horror, fear, pity, and, oddly enough, relief. For there are many things worse than death and destruction, and one of them is the humiliation of attempting to appease the unappeasable. That night, in London, a man who knows the trend of current affairs better than I leaned across a dinner table and said, "My dear fellow, you are a positive jitterbug. I can assure you there won't be any war. It's a gigantic bluff." But as I walked home through the quiet summer streets, the sky no longer seemed friendly. It was just a matter of waiting. And we're now on chapter 7. 80 years later, COVID came. Hello to anybody else who's just joined. Let's have a look at some of the comments. Comments. You must commence today. Ye Baldy Book Explorer Shobi. There we go. Thank you. Francisco Bellringer. Hello, the Vobes. See you at the Vobe show later. All right. So quick and easy. Lots of people. Hello, hot today. Glad I'm listening indoors. Hello to you, Ernie. Linda K, the A1M. Oh, yes, that's right, the Great North Road. But you can trace the original Great North Road. That's the thing. Oh, you're saying that the A1M is what bypasses Stilton. That's true. Seems to be bypassed. Oh, yes, there we go. Thank you, Edward Moulding. The maggots are the best bit, surely. Yes. So who likes Stilton? I don't like Stilton myself. It's far too maggoty. Hot in the fields. You can distill. You can still buy Stilton spoons. Love Stilton, says Andrew Norris. Oh gosh, it's got mould in it. Who wants to eat the mould? I mean, you don't eat mouldy bread. Maybe you do. Maybe they should sell that. Here's some lovely mouldy bread. I can get. Oh, by the way, Linda Kane. Just so you know. Bread flour. Yes, I've been breeding flowers. And now I've harvested them and I can make you your loaf of bread. So I'll let you know, and hopefully maybe over the weekend. What is it today? Friday, yeah. So it's just, when I've got time, but I'll knock you up a loaf. Andrew, maybe it's where the English say bottoms up coming from. I appreciate that. The stronger the better. Let's see where we're going. Not the strength so much, but often the salty and bit harsh. I like Stilton at room temperature. I like Stilton in the bin. Right. Chapter 7, ladies and gentlemen. Chapter 7. I set off in October 1939 to see something of wartime England. I find the Baltic Exchange, working a country house. I see the making of a Wellington bomber. I go to Salisbury Plain, where I ride a tank. At Weymouth, I investigate the methods of contraband control. Somewhere else, I visit a flying school where I'm given a lesson in bombing, and I penetrate the rural hiding place of the BBC, the Biased Broadcasting Corporation. So, it's all good, isn't it? Look forward to this part. The war came at 11 o'clock on a quiet Sunday morning in September. It was announced by Mr. Chamberlain in the tones of an elderly dove whose olive branch had been snatched by rude eagles. And no sooner has his speech over than the sirens wailed in London, and everyone said, "Here they come! Here they come! Take cover! Take cover, Mr. Mainwaring! Take cover! Don't panic, Mr. Mainwaring! Don't panic! Here they come!" But they didn't. Then, as the weeks followed one another, and there was no singing, no marching soldiers, no splendid brass bands, no appeals to king and country, but instead that chill goddess Freedom, whose imminent peril meant nothing to nobody who had always believed themselves to be free. So there was an air of anticlimax over England. The masses of people hadn't died from COVID, and people started to wonder why. London was the same as ever, except for the sandbags by day and the blackout by night and the shine of autumnal moons that turned the city into an enchanted place of turrets and pinnacles. Even Piccadilly Circus was free at last from the vulgarity of electricity-shaken cocktails. And life had changed in the country. Upon 1,000 village greens, indignant women in London clothes wheeled their perambulators and longed for the roar of traffic along the old Kent road. In stately homes and ancient castles, spoilt servitors, perhaps the last of their race, borrowed expressions from the ancestral portraits and viewed with disdain the hordes of clerks and young persons who worked their typewriting machines in the blue bedroom and erected their filing cabinets in the gun room. Managing directors dictated their correspondence, leaning against grand pianos, while secretaries cast jaundiced eyes towards the autumnal cock pheasant on the lawn, while darkness cast its sinister cloak over wartime England. clerks, separated from their wives, and typists from their sweethearts, set off to walk 3 miles through dank and terrifying lanes to the blackout cinema in the nearest town. So hiker and cyclist, until recently so fond of country delights, viewed the rural scene from a new and unexpected angle and found it not what it had been on the Saturday afternoons. There was an air of fantasy about the whole thing. An age had ended in a nightmare, and it would be a long time before the world awakened once again. And war was only 7 weeks old. In France, the British Expeditionary Force was digging itself in for the winter, hiding its guns and aeroplanes. Itchy nose. There had been a few artillery duels over the Maginot and Siegfried lines, but everyone knew that, while the Maginot line was impenetrable, the Siegfried line was made of pure concrete and was liable to floods. Poland had been conquered, but everyone knew that the Polish army, though brave, wore spurs. The Athenia had been sunk. The Royal Oak had been torpedoed in Scarborough Flow. The Germans had just begun to bomb the Firth of Forth, and the RAF was stunning Germany with pamphlets. Mr. Chamberlain assured us more than once that the overwhelming resources of the British Empire made victory a foregone conclusion. Sorry, that's such an itchy nose. At this fateful moment in history, more precisely the 17th of October, I took my gas mask in its virgin cardboard box and a small, rather dramatic first aid outfit, which I had bought years before to take to Turkey and had then left behind, and set out to make a journey through England. I was conscious that in the twinkling of an eye all had changed. Gone was the careless, easy-to-see England that had been technically at peace for so long. It was another England I should see, an England technically at war. If I required proof that all was different, I only had to consult my pockets, which bulged with petrol coupons issued by the Board of Trade, and with credentials and letters of introduction finally furnished by the Ministry of Information, the Admiralty, the War Office, and the Ministry of Supply. It was a new experience for me to go out on a circumscribed tour of this kind, for I'd always been in the habit of starting off at a moment's notice and going I knew not where, wandering on as the mood took me, loitering here, hastening there, with no one to please but myself. But in wartime, even the least suspicious nation, and England is of all nations the most easygoing and the least apprehensive, believes that a man with a map is a spy, as of course he sometimes is. So I found myself obliged to keep up with the programme or itinerary prepared for me at Whitehall. It was one of those mellow, damp autumn mornings when even a London pavement tells you that the country treetops have turned the colour of egg plums and white mists are moving from the... It was one of those mellow, damp autumn mornings when even a London pavement tells you that in the country treetops have turned the colour of egg plums and white mists are moving from valleys. It seemed to me incredible, as I surveyed an unbombed London, that we had been at war for 7 weeks. There was absolutely nothing to show for it, except fewer private cars and almost complete absence of small children, and of course the balloon barrage. My road was for the most of the way the same road I'd taken only 5 months previously when I travelled into Kent. I came into the same fine view over Kent, and was soon running into Westerham, where Wolfe still waved his sword against the sky. Turning west, I made for Surrey and for the remote village in that county where, so it was whispered to me in Whitehall, I should find the Baltic Exchange, or that portion of it most useful to a nation at war, the buyers of wheat. I stayed at night in a small hotel in Surrey, whose bar attracted all the local tradesmen and worthies until you could hardly see the buxom barmaid, known to everyone as Violet, behind the smokescreen. I gathered that there Ribbentrop was much hated in this bar, more so, I think, than old Hitler himself. Sitting in a corner silently, as became a stranger, I thought of all English institutions, the English inn is perhaps the most satisfactory. Parliament may be criticised, democracy may not be what it's supposed to be, the freedom of the press may be suspected, even by the most innocent, to be qualified in some measure by the opinions and interests of a proprietor and his advertisers, but the English inn is really and truly what it claims to be, a common meeting place for all types and classes, where any man may say exactly what he likes without being clubbed by political opponents and dragged off to jail or beaten up on Twitter. Eccentricity and oddity, which have always delighted the English, come into their own when the inn opens its doors in the evening, and the queer characters and local jesters, the men in the fads and fancies who give English life its salt and flavour, are always present, although their fame is strictly local, and the outsider rarely considers them as funny or witty as their own villagers or townsmen do. Above all, perhaps, humour, the best of humour, has its home in the English inn. It deflates the pretentious, it corrects the erroneous, and it deflects the dangerous. The qualities of laughter are nowhere more noticeable than in the true Parliament of England, which goes by the name of the Green Dragon or the King's Arms. As I listened with pleasure to the discussions around the bar, I thought of the blackout beyond the door, symbolic of the blackout of freedom and of free speech that seeks to conquer the world. And as I looked at the ordinary common Englishmen with their tankards and glasses, small tradesmen, farmers and the like, I thought how surprised they would be if I rose up and told them that as they stood there arguing in loud, fearless voices about national and local affairs, they represented nearly everything we are fighting to preserve in England. Many of them were old soldiers, and I heard the word Ypres and Cambrai, Cambria, spoken by men who had fought in the last war. For the first time in 20 years, their reminiscences were respectful and earnestly listened to by the younger generation. Their sons were now in France. Under the influence of a pint or two, they talked the kind of talk one often heard in the early 20s of Ypres, of Festubert, I'm sure that's not how it's pronounced, and Nouveau Chapelle, of Jerry, of rations and sudden death and horror. It was like putting the clock back 20 years. Those warriors, men of my generation, seemed to have aged considerably, and I wondered whether I looked as old as they did. There was one old man, a mild little draperish man. There was one old man, a mild little draperish man, who brought up horrible memories for the edification of two glum companions. They smoked steadily and said, "Ah," and "Go on," at the right moments. You remember old James Wilkins, him whose father had Upper Court Farm years back? "Ah," said his companions. "Well, he was another of them that got blown up." He lifted his tankard and gazed at the stony faces of his companions over the rim. "Go on," they said. "He joined my push with Tony Edwards, who used to keep the White Hart. It was Tony Edwards who told me what happened. They were out one night in a shell hole, waiting to nip over and pinch Jerry prisoner. You had to do that now and then, and they gave you an extra rum ration before you started." "Go on," said the listeners. "Well, While they were lying there, Jerry started shelling, and one of the shells dropped short and hit James Wilkins. They couldn't find a blessed particle. And the awful thing was, it's an awful thing, wasn't it? Yet, do you know his widow always thought he'd come back some day and come walking in through the door. Funny how women get these ideas, isn't it? Then there was Frank Wilson from Dorking. No one ever knows what happened to him. And off he went again with his gloomy reminiscences, deriving some sombre pleasure from it, as gentle people occasionally find pleasure in ghastly stories of the operating theatre. The group around the bar was debating with vigour and with considerable heat whether we ought to have gone to rescue Czechoslovakia. Someone asked Violet to switch on the wireless because it was just on news time. She turned the switch, and a hearty voice began singing, "We'll hang out the washing on the Siegfried line. Have you any dirty washing, mother dear?" Then came the news with the latest details of an air raid on the Firth of Forth. It's all gone a bit macabre now, isn't it? Let's have a look at the massages. That was quite a clever joke, Ed. Oh, I'm missing all the jollies. You're right, Linda. It does sound like it now. It does sound nice and garlicky. He's reading really well today, very fluent. Thank you very much. Well, trying to. It's when it goes into the dialogue, sometimes that's without. I'm sight reading, so sometimes a bit tricky. I do wish I was a lot more fluent, but hey ho. I'm going to blame it on the one eye and the glossy page. In the morning, I motored off to a neighbouring factory that is making Wellington bombers. I came to a mass of buildings which had hastily been camouflaged and sandbagged. Police were marshalling hundreds of cars belonging to callers in the shadow of the trees and walls. Passing through a swing door, I entered a hall where I was seized upon as a possible spy, made to sign the usual buff form and declare my intentions and credentials. I was then shown into a waiting room full of men in an advanced stage of waiting, each one whom held on his knees or grasped beneath his arm. What? I was then shown into a waiting room full of men in an advanced stage of waiting, each one of whom held on his knees or grasped beneath his arm one of those limp leather portfolios that suggested homing Frenchmen with square black beards clinging to the back of tramcars. In a few moments I was rescued by the man I'd come to see, who took me rapidly through a number of workshops. We came at last to a bridge high up near the roof of an assembly shop. Beneath us, 10 abreast, to the extremity of the shed, stood bombers, each of which cost £22,000, without the guns. Below us they were complete, with wings, turrets, engines, and ready to take to the air. But as the lines receded to the extremity of the shed, the bombers became less complete and more elementary, until, at the very end, they were helpless earthbound chrysalids of beryllium. As I watched, I noticed that the long lines, 10 abreast, were almost imperceptibly moving forward towards us beneath the bridge. The 10 planes immediately below would be wheeled out on their fat balloon tyres through an archway into an open field, and the 10 behind would take their place, and so on down the line to the end of the shed. I felt as some minute form of life, such as an ant might feel as it watched the birth of dragonflies. As the bare, tailless chrysalids advanced, they took on shape and gradually became aerial, sprouting first one wing, then another. Then came the tail with a dinosauric horn at the end of it. Finally, with engines roaring, the aerial machines groped their way into the sunlight under the sky which belongs to them, ready and fitted to lay their eggs of death. Standing beside me on the bridge was the designer of bombing aeroplanes, a plump and kindly man who, I have no doubt, is a great lover of youth and is devoted to animals. How odd it is that out of a mind which can love a child or a kitten can proceed such frightful instruments of destruction. Perhaps, I thought, some of his most devastating ideas came to him while playing good-night games on the nursery floor. His words flew past my ears as I gazed down at his hatchery. 2 engines developing 1,800 horsepower, retracting undercarriage, top speed 265 miles an hour, range about 3,240 miles, 3 guns, crew of 5, bomb-carrying capacity. But tell me, I asked, how is it possible for a man to invent a thing like a bomber? I mean, how do you begin? Well, of course, nobody really invents a bomber, he said. All we have to do is build up on what already exists, improve it, apply new theories, and so on. All aircraft design is an accumulation and the application of experience. And in all great countries of the world, there are men who, like yourself, have devoted their lives to the problem of decanting a ton of high explosives in the most efficient way from a machine moving through the air. Yes, that's so. I should like to have asked if he thought he had any chances of going to heaven, but I came to the conclusion that I didn't know him well enough. Anyhow, in wartime, such effete ethical ideas must be banished from one's mind. I was taken round the factory, where night shift follows day shift, around the clock, where machines never stop, where every process is designed to accelerate the inch-by-inch progress of a bomber from chrysalis to winged body along the vast parade ground of the assembly shop. I saw girls in blue or brown boiler suits, their feet in absurd little feminine shoes, tapping on the pedals of electric machines. I saw hundreds of men busy with thousands of shining, geometrically shaped fragments of metal. I saw girls' hands sewing fabric on great wings and painting the linen in broad patches of brown and green, so that when the bombers are at rest, they may seem part of the autumn woods and fields. And I realised that bombers in the making suggest nothing more exciting to the onlooker than that thousands of people are feverishly trying to put together... Hang on a minute. And I realised that bombers in the making suggest nothing more exciting to the onlooker than that thousands of people are feverishly trying to put together a gigantic Meccano set. The pieces of duralium, silver white, and as light as aluminium, but as strong as milled steel, comes out of the presses and jigs punctured with countless rivets holes and pass onward to be joined together. Something like 16,000 separate parts, all firmly bolted, form the skeleton of the fuselage. But what amazed me, a stage further on, was the intricate system of nerves, veins and arteries running through the body in an arm-thick bunch of red, white and yellow and green electric cable. The organs of the machine, the heart, the lungs, the liver, so to speak, to which these veins converge, are instruments which apply by their number and complexity as they offer their shining dials and vibrating pointers to... I just read that again because I'm cocking up. The organs of the machine, the heart, eyes, lungs and liver, so to speak, to which these veins converge, are instruments which appall by their number and complexity as they offer their shining dials and vibrating pointers to the eye of the pilot. As I sat in the pilot's seat, I envied the courage of the unknown young man who would someday guide that as yet incomplete engine of death through the heavens. He would sit there where I was sitting, while 1,800 horses galloped with him through the skies, and high above the sleeping villages and little towns and far churches he would go, always watching the pointers and the dials, and perhaps thinking about a girl in Streatham. His companions would move stealthily with bent heads in the gleaming aluminium darkness of the moving body. The machine gunner in his protruding glass dome, the bomber lying full length in the nose of the machine, with his eye to the bomb sights, watching the distant landscape rushing past beneath him. I was recalled to reality by the voice of a works manager, telling me that the machine carried more bombs than any German machine of equivalent size. I climbed out and went to have a look at the bombing rack. This is a miracle of design and workmanship. The bombs are carried in an undercarriage that lifts up into the body of the machine and is enclosed by two hinged and curved portions of the fuselage. When the moment comes for the dropping of the bombs, the whole undercarriage of the machine opens. The gates of death swing back on their hinges to reveal row after row of what look like young torpedoes. The departure of these bombs is worth recording. They are wheeled out to a testing field. Pilots put them through their paces. They make the huge things skid and slip about in the sky as if they were skittish circus planes. Then they come down, tested and correct, and then there's always a line of test bombers ready to be handed over to the Royal Air Force. A young man in blue, who always looks as if he's just left school, throws away his cigarette and approaches the new monster. "All correct?" he asks. "OK," somebody replies. "Righto," he says. Then the young man climbs into the bomber, and in a second or two the fair head and face of the infant are observed gazing down through the glass dome. A hand waves in a pert S long of the palm of the finger. The great propellers go round to an ear-cracking roar of engines and becomes invisible. The green and brown monster moves. It turns. It begins to race along the ground with a deep roar of engines. Its flat black tyres leave the earth. It's flying. And so an infant in a blue uniform disappears into the sky with £22,000 worth of the taxpayers' money and the power of 1,800 horses. After a hasty luncheon at the bomber factory, I left in order to race through Hampshire in an attempt to reach Salisbury before the blackout. I had made a resolution never to move 1 yard after dark, but to stay wherever I happened to be when blackout time arrived. And this I regard as the first rule of wartime travelling. The only traffic I encountered in open country were lorries and military transport. Near the towns, however, a few private cars were to be seen. Upon the 4-mile stretch of straight road between Ovington Down and Winchester there was not a single car, just a long road with its central strip of white stretching into the distance. For the first time for years it was possible to enjoy motoring as those who remember the first Morris Oxfords enjoyed it long ago. The country looked beautiful in the quiet sunlight of late autumn. Trees, woods and coppices were strained in the shades of red and gold like a 19th century aquatant. I don't know what that aquatant is. The leaves were rapidly thinning. The meadow near a wood was scattered with bright yellow leaves, and each time the slightest wind blew there would be a movement among the trees as more leaves fell to earth. Long before the blackout, indeed some time before the sun had set, I saw the thin spire of Salisbury rising above a lake of blue smoke, and so I came down gladly into the busy streets. The hotel was nearly empty, and leaving my bag there, I went out at once into the twilight. There was a tramp of feet in the cloisters, and I saw approaching, walking 2 by 2, choristers returning from evensong. They wore black cloaks, 4-pointed black caps of the pattern Cranmer wore, and round each neck was a little starched ruff like a pie frill. As these impressive songsters walked, clasping their books, a cloak would be kicked out here and there, and I saw that beneath the trappings of the Reformation were ordinary little boys in grey flannel suits with bare knees and woolen stockings. In the huge dark space of the cathedral, where a whisper of organ music moved, there were 4 women in late middle age kneeling in prayer. I sat there, too, in the darkness from which we would soon be turned into the deeper darkness of the streets, thinking that as long as the war lasted I should remember the 4 praying women of Salisbury. They had strips of cheap fur round their collars of their coats, and 2 of the 4 hats had been bought for gay occasions, and now, bent forward in the darkening church, their finery tilted and lowered towards the deity, they looked repentant and pitiful. In France, the sons and the husbands of these women, who were standing too in the hour before dark. In France, the sons and the husbands of those women were standing too in the hour before dark. In Poland, the ruins of Warsaw still smoked, and ahead of us lay God knew how many years of pain and sorrow and prayer and blackout. The verger became busy with the doors, and we knew that we must go. The darkness of the streets in Salisbury could almost be felt. I walked, groping with my hands for the sides of the houses. Approaching walkers shone hand torches on the pavement to give warning of their presence or to see the curb when they were crossing the road. In the main streets, the red, green and yellow traffic lights looked preposterously gay and brilliant in the utter blackness as they winked and changed, and of all the chief pavements there was a surge of invisible men, and on all the chief pavements there was the surge of invisible men and women, soldiers and young women in khaki, whose boots and voices alone proclaimed their existence. And I will pause, I will stop there, I think. For A, I'm tiring, and B, there is a new section. So the change in tone very much now. We don't normally associate miracles with the death of an oxymoron, says Mark Donny MacLeod. Richard, you'll be surprised how small a Lancaster bomb carriage is. Yeah, I don't know what I don't know what they were making in that. He's reading well. Thank you. Look out for Private Walker and his ilk, the parasite of time to become a local gangster a decade later. Yeah, there we go. The spivs. All right, I've got it in here. What would you like? 25 Danya can do that. Gold watch. Got a gold watch. Would you like a gold watch? Why not? Anyway, that's my reading for today at 10 to 5. I hope that was all right. We'll come back to that. Well, it's Friday today, isn't it? So in theory, I'm taking the weekend off. Gosh, is it Friday? Blimey. This week went really quickly, didn't it? So Monday, if I stick to the routine, I don't feel like I've given enough. I don't feel like I've given enough entertainment value this week. I feel like I've diddled you out of it all. But I guess if it's Friday, anyway, the Vogue show is on this evening. The lovely Julia will be with me, so on Skype. So we're looking forward to that. If you've enjoyed any of this, a thumbs up would be appreciated. Marlin Cannon says, come on, it's tea time. Well, I'm going now. Don't panic. Go and have your tea and enjoy it. Anyway, thank you very much. You made my kitchen cleaning flyby. Oh, next time, Adrian, any chance you could clean my kitchen whilst I'm sitting in here reading? You'd be welcome to help yourself to a cup of tea. Honest. Do take the weekend off. All the weeks are going quickly. They are going quickly. Well, I've going to utilise that time to make you a loaf of bread, Linda Kane. So I may have to drop it round on Sunday or something like that. Anyway, take care. That was really nice, Richard. You've given a tremendous amount of today and this week. Well, thank you very much. That's very decent of you. I do try, and I'll try hard. And I just feel like I've not really done enough. Don't know why. Don't know why that is. Anyway, thank you very much, and we'll catch up. We've got the Vogue show tonight, so it's something to look forward to. Going to go and light the Essie now, and start thinking about what the hell I'm going to make in terms of a video for tomorrow. Yeah, I have got tomorrow's video made, but what filming? I know what I mean. Anyway, nice to see you. To see you nice. Ta-ta and bye-bye.